The winter sun hung low over the small western town of Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Most people had finished their daily chores early because that evening was special. It was the night of the annual charity auction and event that everyone in town looked forward to. It was not only a chance to raise money for struggling families, but also the only evening when the whole town gathered in one place to laugh, talk, and share warm food. Caleb Turner rode into town on his dark brown horse with his usual calm confidence. Caleb was known by everyone in Willow Creek. He was a rich rancher, young but hardworking, and he owned nearly 1,000 acres of land on the north side. People respected him, not just for his money, but because he treated everyone with fairness. He never bragged, never boasted, but he had a reputation for never losing a bet, something his friends liked to tease him about. When Caleb stepped off his horse and tied the reins, 3 of his friends, Tom, Earl, and Jackson, called out to him from the steps of the town hall. "There he is." Tom laughed. "The man who thinks he can win any bet thrown his way." Caleb raised an eyebrow, smiling lightly. "You boys have been bored all week, haven't you?" "Oh, we found something interesting to talk about today," Earl said, nudging Jackson. Jackson pointed toward the people entering the hall. "See her?" "The widow. She's here this year again." Caleb followed their gaze and saw a woman walking slowly toward the entrance. She wore a long shawl and a heavy wig that covered almost all her hair. Her head was always lowered and her steps were small, so she didn't want anyone to notice her. "That's Mrs. Eleanor Hayes," Tom said. "Every year she comes, bids on one item, and wins it. Doesn't talk much. Folks say she's hiding something." Caleb frowned. "She lost her husband a few years ago. People should let her be." "That may be true," Earl said. "But we've got a bet for you, Caleb. Tonight you won't be able to outbid her. She has beaten every strong bidder in the past 2 years." Caleb shook his head. "I'm not here to play games. It's a charity event." "But you never say no to a challenge," Jackson replied with a grin. "Come on, if you lose, you buy dinner for all 3 of us. If you win, well, we'll treat you next week." Caleb didn't reply at first. He didn't like the idea of making a bet involving someone who kept to herself. But his friends were staring at him with such eager, childish excitement that he finally sighed. "All right," he said gently. "1 bet. But we keep it respectful." They cheered as if they had already won something. Caleb simply shook his head and walked inside with them. The town hall was warm and lively. Lanterns hung from the rafters, and the smell of fresh bread filled the room. People gathered in small groups, talking and laughing. A long wooden table near the stage held the items to be auctioned: handmade blankets, carved wooden toys, a saddle, jars of honey, old paintings, and one small wooden box made by the town's elderly carpenter, Mr. Miller. Caleb noticed Eleanor standing near a corner. She didn't talk to anyone. She held her shawl tightly around her, as if shielding herself from the world. Her wig, thick and curled unnaturally, sat slightly crooked on her head. Caleb wondered why she wore it. He remembered her from years ago before her husband died. She used to teach the children at the small church school. Back then, her hair was long, thick, and full of life. But now, she seemed like a shadow of the woman she once was. The auction began, and the crowd cheered. People clapped when children sold jars of cookies, when local families donated small handmade gifts, and when the town baker auctioned off his famous fruit pie. Eleanor stayed silent through everything, waiting. Caleb noticed her eyes kept drifting toward the little wooden box carved with delicate patterns. Even from a distance, could tell the box meant something to her. Mr. Miller stepped onto the stage and lifted the box gently. "This here," he said proudly, "is made from the old oak tree in my backyard. My late wife loved that tree. This box holds memories for me, and I hope it brings comfort to whoever takes it home." The crowd grew quiet at his words. Eleanor raised her hand first, her voice soft as she said, $5. Caleb saw the gentle tremble in her fingers. Something inside him softened, but before he could stop himself, he remembered the bet. Tom nudged him sharply. Caleb raised his hand. $10. Eleanor did not look at him, but she slowly lifted her hand again. 15. Caleb raised his hand. 20. The crowd murmured with interest. Nobody had ever outbid Eleanor before, and now the famous rancher was challenging her. Eleanor hesitated for a moment. Then she lifted her hand. 25. Caleb lifted his again. 30. The hall went silent. Eleanor finally lifted her head to look at the rancher. Her eyes, though tired, were steady and calm. She took a breath, then raised her hand with quiet firmness. 35. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to embarrass her, but the bet hung in his mind, pushed by his friend's hopeful stares. He lifted his hand slowly. 40. Few people gasped. Eleanor froze. For the first time since the auction began, she looked uncertain. Her lips pressed together. She clutched the edge of her shawl. After a long moment, she lowered her hand. The room relaxed, and the crowd clapped as the auctioneer called out, "Sold for $40 to Mr. Caleb Turner." Caleb accepted the wooden box, but something felt wrong. He looked toward Eleanor, hoping she wasn't upset. To his surprise, she walked toward him. Her voice was soft but calm. "Mr. Turner, may I see the box for a moment?" Caleb nodded politely. Of course. She reached out gently, touching the box as if it were something fragile. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful. But then, a sudden gust of cold wind blew through the hall as someone opened the door. The wind was strong enough to lift one corner of her wig. A few people turned their heads. Surprised, Eleanor immediately pressed her hand to her head, trying to fix the wig. Her face grew pale. Without saying another word, she hurried away, her shawl fluttering behind her. Caleb stared after her, feeling a heaviness in his chest. This wasn't the reaction of someone angry about losing a bid. It was the reaction of someone hiding something painful. Tom, Earl, and Jackson came up behind him. "You won. See, we told you no one beats Caleb Turner." Caleb didn't smile. "That didn't feel like winning," he said quietly. His friends looked confused. "What do you mean?" "It was just a harmless bet." Caleb shook his head. Maybe it wasn't harmless to her. He carried the box toward the exit, still feeling the weight of the moment. Outside, the air was cold. He looked around the empty street but could not see Eleanor anywhere. She must have left quickly and quietly. Caleb paused beside his horse. Something inside him told him that Eleanor Hayes was not simply a quiet widow hiding from gossip. There was something deeper, something painful, something she protected with all her strength. Evan, a wig that she held on to, as if it were a shield. As he lifted the wooden box into his saddlebag, he made a quiet decision. He would return the box to her. He would find out why she wanted it so badly. And most importantly, he wanted to understand why she looked familiar in a way that touched his heart, like someone whose story was not finished. Caleb Turner, the rancher who never lost a bet, rode home with a heavy heart. For the first time, a simple auction felt like more than an event. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name, something that would change both his life and hers. Caleb Turner could not sleep that night. The wooden box he had won at the charity auction sat on the small table near his bed, catching the soft glow of the lantern. Every time he looked at it, he felt a quiet heaviness in his heart. He kept thinking about Eleanor Hayes, the widow who had walked out of the hall with her hand pressed tightly against her wig, her face pale with shame. He replayed the moment in his mind. The gust of wind, the wig shifting, her frightened eyes, and the way she hurried out, as if the whole world had suddenly turned against her. Caleb knew the look of someone trying to hide pain. He had seen it. On the faces of ranch workers who carried heavy burdens, on children who feared asking for help, and even on strangers passing through Willow Creek. But Eleanor's pain felt different. It was quiet, deeper, and hidden behind many layers of silence. By sunrise, Caleb made up his mind. He saddled his horse, placed the wooden box carefully in his saddlebag, and rode toward the small cottage on the outskirts of town where Eleanor lived. A quiet home with heavy shadows. Eleanor Hayes lived in a small, modest house surrounded by tall pine trees. Her late husband had built the house years ago, long before illness or hardship had touched their lives. The path leading to it was covered with dried leaves, and the wooden fence leaned slightly, as if tired of standing for too many years. Caleb slowed his horse as he approached. He didn't want to startle her. He dismounted quietly and walked toward the porch, noticing a broken step and chipped paint on the door. Everything about the house looked worn out, like it had been waiting too long for someone to care about it. He knocked gently. For a moment, there was silence. Then, soft footsteps. The door opened a little, and Eleanor peeked out, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her wig was fixed carefully this time, though it still looked stiff and uncomfortable. "Mr. Turner," she said in a surprised tone. "What brings you here this early?" Caleb removed his hat respectfully. "I came to return something and to apologize." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Please come in." The inside of her home was neat, but simple. A small fireplace warmed the room. A quilt lay half-finished on the table beside several spools of thread. Shelves held medicine bottles, tea tins, and old books. A sense of quiet loneliness filled the space, as if the house had been too silent for too long. Caleb handed her the wooden box. "This belongs with you," he said softly. "I didn't mean to take it from you." Eleanor looked at the box as if she were seeing an old friend. Her fingers trembled slightly when she touched it. "I appreciate your kindness," she said. "But you won it fairly. I should not take it back. It didn't feel fair," Caleb admitted. "I made a bet without knowing what this meant to you, and that was wrong." Eleanor's eyes softened. She motioned for him to sit. The truth she had hidden for a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled in the fireplace, filling the silence with quiet warmth. Caleb noticed a small wig stand placed in the corner, holding another wig slightly older and worn. He understood then that Eleanor did not wear it by choice. It was something she needed. Eleanor followed his gaze and gently lowered her eyes. "I suppose you saw the accident at the auction," she said quietly, her fingers tightening around the box. Caleb nodded. "Saw the wind lift your wig. But that shouldn't be something to be ashamed of." She took a long breath. "People talk, Mr. Turner. They always talk. And I have had more than enough whispers in my life." Caleb kept his gaze gentle. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." But Eleanor, perhaps for the first time in years, felt someone listening without judgment. She set the wooden box on the table and sat down slowly. "2 years ago," she began softly, "I became very sick. The doctor said it would change many things in my life. He was right. I lost my health and my hair. I didn't mind the sickness as much, but the change in my appearance—" She touched the edge of her wig. "It made me feel like a stranger in my own skin." Caleb felt a quiet ache in his chest. "That must have been difficult." "It was," she admitted. "After my husband passed away, the sickness grew worse. I had no strength to work, and I stopped going into town. People started wondering why I didn't show myself anymore. Some said I was hiding. Others said things far worse. I wore the wig so I could walk into town without feeling their eyes on me." She looked down at her hands. "I wanted that wooden box because Mr. Miller's wife was very kind to me before I became ill. She always told me that life can take away many things, but there is always something left worth holding on to. This box reminds me of her words." Caleb listened carefully. He had known Mrs. Miller too. She was gentle, always smiling, always encouraging others. "It makes sense then," Caleb said softly. "You weren't just bidding on a box. You were bidding on a memory." Eleanor nodded, and her eyes filled with quiet emotion. The hidden recognition. Caleb hesitated, then spoke with careful kindness. "Eleanor, may I ask something?" "Of course." "When you took off your wig, just for that moment, I felt like I had seen you somewhere before." Eleanor looked surprised. "You have?" she said quietly. "Years ago? I used to teach at the church schoolhouse." Caleb's memories clicked into place. He saw a younger Eleanor, smiling, energetic, helping children read, fixing their clothes, comforting them, and giving them hope. Back then, her hair had been long and soft like a field of golden wheat. But it wasn't the hair that Caleb remembered most. It was the kindness in her heart. "You were always good with children," he said. "Everyone loved you." Eleanor smiled faintly. Life was different then. Caleb saw how hard those words were for her. He leaned forward slightly. "You're still the same person," he said. "Hair or no hair, wig or no wig, you're still you." Eleanor looked down, touched by his sincerity. A rancher's promise. Caleb noticed the roof leaking slightly above the back door. The fence outside needed repair. The firewood stack was low. Without loudly pointing anything out, he understood one thing. She was trying to survive quietly without asking for help. "Eleanor," he said gently, "may I help you with some repairs around your place? Just simple things, nothing heavy?" Immediately, she shook her head. "I don't want to bother anyone. I have lived alone for a long time. I don't expect kindness from people anymore." Caleb's voice remained calm. "It's not a bother. Home needs care. Everyone does." But Eleanor had built many walls over the years. "I can manage," she whispered. Caleb didn't push further. But inside, he made a silent promise. He would not let her continue struggling alone. A small act that changed everything before leaving. Caleb handed the wooden box to her again. "Please, take it, I insist." Eleanor hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She opened the box carefully. Inside, she found a folded letter she had not expected. It was written by Mrs. Miller long ago. The old ink lines read, "When life becomes heavy, remember that strength is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and patient. It waits for you, even when you feel lost." Eleanor's hand shook. She pressed the letter to her heart. Caleb watched her silently, giving her space. After a long moment, she whispered, "Thank you." Caleb nodded, tipping his hat. "If you ever need anything, I'm just a short ride away." She gave him a small, grateful smile, one that held warmth he had not seen from her before. As Caleb rode away, he felt something different inside him. A quiet determination, a desire to help her, protect her, make her feel safe again. He didn't care if it took days, weeks, or months. He knew Eleanor Hayes had carried her burden alone for too long, and something told him the next part of their story had only just begun. The next morning, Willow Creek woke to a quiet, silver dawn. A thin fog drifted over the fields, and frost painted the grass in delicate white. Caleb Turner stood at the doorway of his ranch house, looking out across the land he had worked on since he was young. Normally, the early morning brought him peace. But today, his thoughts traveled to Eleanor Hayes. He kept remembering her tired smile, the weight behind her gentle voice, and the way she had held the wooden box like something too precious to lose. He remembered the letter she found inside, the words of hope that had brought tears to her eyes. And he remembered the loneliness in her small home, which she tried so hard to hide. Caleb tightened the gloves on his hands. That loneliness should not continue. He had promised not to disturb her, but kindness did not always require knocking on a door. There were things he could do quietly, things that would help her without making her feel uncomfortable. With that thought, he mounted his horse and rode toward town. A quiet kindness sat at the hardware store. Caleb bought fresh wood, nails, paint, and a new set of tools meant for small repairs. He also ordered extra firewood to be delivered to Eleanor's house anonymously. When the storekeeper asked who the supplies were for, Caleb simply smiled. "A friend," he said. From there, he visited the town bakery. Mrs. Callahan, the baker, handed him a warm loaf of bread and a basket of biscuits. "Who's this for?" she asked with curiosity. "Just someone who might need a good meal," Caleb replied. Mrs. Callahan tilted her head knowingly. "That widow who lives near the pine woods?" Caleb's expression remained calm. "I didn't say that." The baker simply smiled and packed an extra jar of honey into the basket. "Kindness never hurts anyone, Caleb," she said with the supplies loaded. Caleb rode out again. Instead of knocking on Eleanor's door, he placed the items quietly on her porch and repaired the broken step without making a sound. Then he moved to the fence and fixed the loose boards. By the time the sun began to rise higher, he had done all he could without disturbing her before leaving. He slipped the food basket near her door and rode off. Eleanor's surprise, Leonard Hayes, woke up later than usual that morning. She had spent much of the night reading Mrs. Miller's old letter again and again, letting the gentle words ease the ache inside her heart. As she walked toward the front door, she planned to take in a bit of morning air, but when she opened the door, she froze. A fresh loaf of bread sat on her porch. A basket with warm biscuits, honey, and simple food items rested beside it. New firewood had been neatly stacked under the awning. And more surprising than anything, the broken step had been repaired. smooth and safe again. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She walked slowly, touching the wood with her fingertips. She looked toward the fence and noticed the boards had been straightened and secured. She knew immediately who had done it. Caleb Turner. A soft warmth filled her chest one. She had not felt in years, but she also felt fear. Not fear of him, but fear of allowing someone to help her again. Fear of accepting kindness she had convinced herself she no longer deserved. She wasn't used to letting people into her life anymore. Still, she couldn't ignore the quiet hope growing inside her, a visit that changed something later in the afternoon. Caleb returned, not secretly this time. He rode up the path and saw Eleanor standing near the fence, her shawl wrapped warmly around her shoulders. She wasn't wearing her wig today. Instead, a soft cloth covered her head, tied neatly behind her ears. When she saw Caleb, she did not rush inside or hide. She stayed right where she was, waiting. Caleb dismounted slowly. "Good afternoon, Eleanor," he said gently. Her eyes softened. "You were here this morning, weren't you?" Caleb shrugged lightly. "Maybe." She looked at the repaired step, the fence, and the firewood. "Why would you do all this?" "Because it needed doing," he said simply. "And because everyone deserves help sometimes." Eleanor lowered her gaze. "I don't want to be someone's burden." "You aren't a burden," Caleb said, his voice steady. "You never were. You never will be." Eleanor took in a slow breath. "It has been a long time since anyone showed me kindness without expecting something in return." "Well," Caleb said softly, "then maybe it's time that changed." She had no words, but the silence between them felt gentle, not awkward. Opening the box again, Eleanor motioned for Caleb to follow her inside. She brought out the wooden box she had cherished and placed it on the table. "There's something I want to show you," she said. She opened the box again, revealing a small stack of letters, more than the one she had found earlier. These were letters written by Mrs. Miller over many years. Letters Eleanor had received when she was younger, but kept hidden, because they brought bittersweet memories. Caleb looked at the letters, surprised. "I didn't know you had more." "I kept them safe," she said. "But I stopped reading them after my illness began. They made me remember the person I used to be, the strong one, the cheerful one, the one who didn't hide." She paused, touching the edge of a letter. "Yesterday, when the wind lifted my wig, I felt exposed, afraid. I thought people would laugh or judge me." Caleb spoke calmly. "No one should laugh at someone's pain." Eleanor lifted her eyes. "But you didn't judge me." Caleb shook his head. "I saw someone brave, not weak." Eleanor's eyes shimmered, but she held her emotions steady. "I want to try again," she whispered. "To live without fear, to be part of the town again. Maybe slowly, but I want to try." Caleb's heart warmed. "And you won't have to do it alone." A year of change days passed, then weeks. Winter softened into spring. Bit by bit, Eleanor began showing herself more. She visited the market, walked along the church path, and helped the seamstress mend clothes for town children. Without her wig, she felt vulnerable, but people treated her kindly, thanks in part to Caleb standing quietly by her side. When gossip arose, he silenced it with simple words: "Show respect." When she felt nervous in crowded places, he walked with slow steps beside her when she needed to rest. He never pushed her to do more, and Eleanor changed too. She smiled more. She laughed softly. She opened her windows in the morning to let sunlight in. She accepted small tasks from neighbors and gave back what she could, sewing, cooking, and offering gentle advice. People began to see the woman she truly was, not someone hiding behind a wig, but someone who had survived something difficult and come out stronger. A new beginning at the next auction 1 year later. The charity auction returned. This time, the hall was brighter, filled with joyful voices. Caleb arrived early, standing near the entrance. He wasn't making any bets today. He was simply waiting. When Eleanor appeared at the doorway, the room grew quiet, but not with judgment. With respect, she wasn't hiding anymore. She wore a simple headscarf that matched her dress and walked with steady, confident steps. Her smile was gentle but brave. Caleb stepped forward, offering his arm. "Ready?" Eleanor nodded. more than ever. Together they walked inside. People greeted them kindly. Mr. Miller, the old carpenter, smiled warmly when he saw the wooden box tucked under Eleanor's arm. "There you go," he said. "It seems that box found the right hands after all." Eleanor smiled. "Yes, it helped me remember who I am." And Caleb added softly, "It helped both of us." It's a quiet ending that meant everything as the auction began. Caleb leaned close and whispered, "Last year, I made a bet. I thought it was harmless, but I was wrong." Eleanor looked at him curiously. "And this year?" Caleb smiled. "This year, I won something far better than any bet." She blushed lightly, but didn't look away. For the rest of the night, they stayed together, talking, laughing, sharing simple joys. Their bond grew not from grand gestures, but from small acts of kindness, honesty, and understanding. The story ended not with dramatic moments or loud declarations, but with something quiet and pure. Two people, both scarred by life, finding hope again, not in what they lost, but in what they found in each other.